'75 Ford Rancharo, Ford 9-inch rear end, CJ Pony Parts disc brake assembly, Speedway Motors posi track, moser axles. Axle bearing seal rides up in here. We got both of these sitting here. We're going to talk about the differences in them. So, I don't know if you got a good close up on this. This style right here, I'm going to move the pumpkin out of the way. Ford style sealed roller bearing. The factory Ford unit was a tapered roller bearing, and it had a race that set in here, and it had a seal on the outside here which kept the grease from leaking out, but it also had this seal way back in here, and that kept the rear end fluid in the rear end lubricating the gears and the posi track unit. So that seal actually rides on this surface right here. Now, if you'll notice, the sealed bearing has an O-ring right there. The way it all measures out, that O-ring won't fully catch in there the way it needs to. It kind of rides on the gap, the crack between the rear end housing and the disc brake assembly. So we're going to go ahead and put the seal in there for it to ride right here, even though it has the O-ring. That's why. This one right here, the original one, you would repack with grease ever so often. That right there is just a sealed roller bearing, and if it starts leaking, replace it. It's junk. Going in a straight line, just for drag racing, the sealed roller bearing is it's fine. If it was going to see some heavy side thrust angles, we would want to go back with the tapered roller bearing, because these can take way more lateral abuse than the roller bearings can. For what the application of the car's getting, that sealed roller bearing will be just fine for what the customer is planning on doing with this. So we are going to start by putting the seal in. We want it to ride on the outside of that. We don't want it to touch that rubber at all as we're driving that in there. This is just a cheap, I say cheap, EverTouch seal driver set. Seal and race. It will do the same like the original race that goes in here. You could drive the race in with this too. But we bought this kit, but you could buy this from or rent it from O'Reilly's for just a few dollars, and then they will they'll give you your money back when you get it turned back in. Just kind of looking at it and feeling it for it to go in nice and even all the way around. We're touching everywhere. So from there, we're going to go do the other side. We don't need to show you every bit of this, but I'm going to put the seal on the other side. Colby is going to install the third member with a brand new gasket, and we'll slide the axles in and show you how all that goes together. So Colby's underneath there. He's wiping the mating surface off on the rear end housing, and I am giving this just an ever so thin layer of RTV silicone. Really, really thin. You don't want to ooze a lot of it out. You don't have to use the silicone, but I find that it's better if you do. Just put just a very minimalist about on it. And I went around it with the center line of just the bolt circle, like the center line of the bolt circle for the rear end. And I'm squeezing it all towards the inside. That way when it squishes, it is squeezed just a little bit to the outside, but not too much. I'm going to use the wrapper that the gasket came in. I'm just going to flip that. I did the front, we test fit it first. So we're just doing just a real thin coat right there in the center line of the bolt hole. When Colby test fitted earlier, we figured out the orientation, meaning which way's up, which way's left, which way's right, all that, where when I hand it back to him, he can just slip it right on the studs. We can go to setting the rear end. The rear end's already been painted. The new Speedway posi track unit has been painted. Okay. Still have our RTV even though we stuck it down. Okay. It should go on like that right there. I'll fold that down on itself so it don't get goo pucky everywhere. And we're also going to use that piece of cardboard for the changeover from the freshly painted Speedway Motors posi track. I'm going to set it right there and Colby's going to pick it up from right there. You got it?
Yep.
And I'll hand it over to you. There you go. Okay. What's your, yep, there you go. Good. Colby's gonna install the poly lock nuts and be ready to slide axles in as soon as he gets that torque down. I'm going. We're just wiping down the mating surfaces here. We're not putting anything on them. No silicone or anything like that. We investigated this because it was leaking. And we didn't build the rear end. We just got it that way, and it was something that we had to dig into when we got to that spot. But it's a good thing we did, because the axle wasn't fully engaging the posi track unit in the third member. So you can see how short this is. On the Ford 9-inch factory posi track units, there's actually on the driver's side axle, there's 2 sets of splines on the driver's side. And this one is going in the outward set of splines, but it wasn't engaging the inward. It was just sitting there melting the clutch pack unit and the posi track because it was spinning one. It was literally like it was grabbing the passenger side tire and the driver's side tire was just spinning, is what it was simulating for the posi track unit to go through. So that's when we ordered the new moser set of axles with the sealed bearings. Got our seal put in, which you saw earlier. Got all the mating surfaces wiped down. Got grease on the seal. We got some grease down here where it's going to ride. I'm going to show you one other part on this. It goes in there. Nice. So, Ford 9-inch. There's small bearing, there's big bearing, and then there's big bearing Torino style. This one happens to be the big bearing Torino style, and it has from the face of the housing to the face of the axle should measure 2.5 inches. So when you put all this together, it had about 100 thousandths worth of side thrust slop in it. Had the choice of either machining the backing plate down to get that distance back or making a shim. We could have machined this down, but that would have taken our 250 thousandths thick bracket and made it like 100 thousandths thick bracket where it bolts to the surface, and I don't want a failure spot there. It was engineered to be 250 thousandths thick, so we're leaving it 250 thousandths thick. We actually took the old race from the old bearing and machined it to use as a shim. So this will hold the axle firmly against the rear end housing with just the right amount of preload. And then our moser axle keepers go in, and this just slides down right on that, like that. We're gonna let Colby torque that to 35 foot-pounds, the carrier to housing, and then we will, I'll slide the other axle in, then we'll let Colby torque those up too. So Colby's finishing up torquing the carrier to housing to 35 foot-pounds. I'm installing the same setup on the axle retaining studs. It's going to torque to the same 35 foot-pounds, and then we're going to let Colby put the brakes on it. One disclaimer: all the torque specs stated in the video are for the parts in this car. Please look up all of your torque specs for exactly the parts you're using and what you're doing. So our 35 foot-pounds might be something different for you, and that's something that every project needs to be looked up individually.